But for tonight, I want to do 6 more characteristics out of the 50 characteristics of complex trauma. What I want you to understand is the last characteristic we're going to look at is addiction. But there's 49 other characteristics. So many people with complex trauma don't end up addicts, but they got all the other stuff. Some end up addicts. And when we get to that, I'm going to tell you why I think that's maybe a blessing for many people with complex trauma. It forces them to deal with stuff they would never deal with under any other circumstance. But tonight I want to do 6 more, and I hope, again, they give you insight. What I think you're going to see as you try and process these 50 characteristics is that some of them in your life will be triggers. So we are going to talk about tonight disrespect. So that could be a huge trigger for you. And then what can come out of that is a bunch of behaviors. And some of the 50 characteristics will be your pattern of behaviors once you get triggered. So part of why I teach this is to help people begin to understand their patterns so that they can catch them, stop them, and then replace them with new behaviors and new patterns. So the first one tonight, we talked about just introducing last week about a person that comes out of complex trauma where they're neglected, abused, abandoned. They draw conclusions about themselves. And the conclusion is, I must not be lovable, or I must not have any value. I'm not worth anything unless I do something. We call that shame. And so one of the things, the 42nd characteristic is that when they go to try and find value, they go about it in a wrong or an unhealthy way. It seems to solve the problem, but it really doesn't. And I hope you'll see that as I explain it. And so the main thing that we're going to see tonight is that you compare yourself with others in a particular area. So last week you looked at position, you looked at the things you do. Tonight I want you to think about comparison. So what you do is you compare your ability in one area with somebody else, and you go either, okay, I'm better than them, so I have more value than them, or I suck compared to them, so that proves I have no value. And that is the process. Now, most of us are smart. We choose to compare ourselves with people that we know are a lot worse than us. So you have a girl that is a 10 hot. She doesn't compare herself so much with other 10s, so that kind of bugs her. She compares herself with 1s and 2s and 3s, and she walks around and goes, see, I'm valuable. And then the proof is, guys pay me attention, they don't pay attention to the 1s and 2s. And so that proves I have value. So people find an area in which they seem to have some skill, ability, or a natural built-in part of them, and they use that as the arena to compete with everybody else and to compare themselves. So I put a bunch of things on the screen there. So beauty, body, sex, whether you're better in bed, whether you slept with more people, all of those become comparison points. Then if you can't compete in that arena, you're a 1, 2, or 3, you go, well, let's go to a different arena. How about I'm smarter than everybody else? Now, being a nerd or a geek used to not be something you'd be proud of, but since the era of Bill Gates and Sheldon on Big Bang Theory, it's cool to be a geek. And so people now use that as a way of comparing themselves to the dummies in the class, or your position, your job, how much money you make, how much you own. All of those can become your comparison things. Some people use religion. And what they say is, I'm more spiritual than that person. Because I go to church more, I read my Bible more, blah, blah, blah. And they start a comparison around a bunch of standards they devise as to make them better than others in the Christian world. Some, and many of you might relate to this, you couldn't compete in the other arenas. So you just said, I'm going to be the baddest of the bad. I'll compete with other bad boys, and I'll be badder than any of them. And so that became your prestige. That became what caused people to look up to you and go, wow. So we all find an arena to compete in. Now, there's a problem with it. It doesn't work in the long run. Because what happens in the long run is as soon as you get 1 year older, you go, oh, do I see a wrinkle? Oh, maybe I can't compete anymore in that arena. And you get all insecure. Then you got to go around and prove that you're still hotter than the other 10s. So you always got something to prove now, but you're insecure that you might be bested by that new hot thing that just came on the scene. And so you live with this insecurity, always have something to prove. I remember as a young guy, somebody said to me, if you don't have anything to prove, you never have anything to lose. Because as long as you got to prove something, you're always at risk of losing your position. But if you're just okay with who you are, and you don't have to prove you're better than others, you don't have to prove you have value, then you can relax. And the insecurity will not be there. The next one is that one of the solutions, so we compare to find value. Some people then go to, let's focus on my image. And so what they feel internally is, I have no value, I'm not lovable, I'm a mess on the inside, I don't want anybody to see the real me, so I'll build walls around me, I'll wear masks, but I will focus on projecting an image. So when I am in public, my makeup will always be on. I will be on my game. I will be very good as far as social skills. I will be great at sarcasm, cracking jokes, telling stories. And I will be great at my job. And I will have a house that is in perfect order. Everything is neat and tidy. And my kids, when we go in public, will be dressed right up. And they will be behaving. And you put on this image, and some of you grew up in families like that. Inside the four walls of your home, it was World War III. Outside, you look like the perfect family. What I have seen with people that do that is they get a lot of respect. But something goes on inside them that goes, I don't know if I can appreciate that respect, because if they knew the real me, they wouldn't be giving me that respect. So that respect really doesn't mean much to me. It doesn't really penetrate my heart. I like it, but it doesn't satisfy. And so what then happens with many people is they look successful, and then they get more responsibilities. Another child, a promotion at work. And all of a sudden they go, I'm having trouble keeping this image intact. It is taking too much time, too much energy, too much skill, and little pieces start to crumble. And it's usually the relationships at home that start to suffer the most. And so you're holding it together as best you can on the outside, but things are starting to fall apart. And what I say to many clients who have done this is, it's like you've built a house of cards. And it's all looking good, but man, is it a wobbly thing. It just takes one puff of wind, and that whole thing falls down. But if you've done that, it is really hard to stop that. Because you've gained a certain amount of respect in the community, people expect you to do all that you do. And if you start saying no to people, I can't do that, then they'll start looking down on you and losing respect for you. So what's the solution when you're young? I'll just pedal harder. And you burn yourself out. Then you get into recovery. The temptation is, let's start putting all the energy into looking good. Somebody asked me to do something. Well, I got lots of skill in administration and that kind of stuff. Sure, I'll say yes because I don't want to disappoint anybody. And pretty soon you're back into the image thing. Do you want to know why some people relapse in recovery? Because they need a vacation from maintaining the image. They don't know how to say no. They're afraid of disappointing people, so they just relapse in their mind for a little while so that then they'll get back on track. And I have talked to many clients who've relapsed, they get back on track, then they get the image going till they burn themselves out again, relapse, and a cycle starts over and over, repeating itself. And I ask them straight up, when are you going to stop with the image? When are you going to be real and be honest with yourself and with others that you can't keep living this way? That is a scary place to come to, but it is so important if you're going to make it in recovery and become a healthy person. Because you want to know what one of the things is happening? As you're saying yes to everybody and doing all of this stuff and making a perfect image, you're getting resentment toward that person that asked you to do that, and you're getting a resentment toward that person that asked you to do that. Really, you get a resentment toward yourself that you can't say no. It just backfires and backfires, and it never works. Next one. One of the things that happens when you have that shame, I'm not good enough, so you can do what you do, we looked at, then you can compare yourself, you can do the image. Then the next thing is, get in a relationship where it's unequal, where the dynamics of the relationship are a superior person and an inferior person. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're the addict. It's obvious you're the sick one. So guess who came along to rescue you? Mr. Perfect, who doesn't have any issues. And they helped you get into recovery. And you go, this is great. And the person that helped you walks around saying, I'm so glad I could help them. And you're saying, I so appreciate them. Do you want to know how many clients who are the sick ones have said to me, my parents think they have zero issues, that I'm the only problem. If I was clean and sober, they'd have a perfect family. Or, my boyfriend is perfect. He doesn't have any issues. You want to know what goes on in my head? Right. Let's wait a couple months. And before in a couple months they're in my office saying, what a jerk. They are a control freak. I go, oh, good. I'm glad you're starting to see that. So let me explain it to you. The hero and the sick one both have the same shame issues. They both don't feel very good. But here's what happens. The hero says, I will get my validation from others. I can't validate myself very well. I need others to validate me. So I will be a hero, knight in shining armor, coming in on my white horse to rescue these sick people. And then the sick person has the same shame issues, but when some hero comes and rescues them, they go, I must have some value and I must be somewhat lovable because they wanted me, because they care about me. Oh, I feel better. So both of them are trying to get their shame solved, one by helping, one by being helped. Now here's what begins to happen. Let's say you're the addict. This is the hero, but they both got shame issues. You start to heal. You get healthier and healthier and healthier. You are changing the dynamics of the relationship. So now it's not superior, inferior. Now it's equal. Well, whoa. For the hero, they don't like that. Because now you're making it look like you don't need them, and that maybe you're going to grow past them. But in order for them to stay in solving their shame in their unhealthy way, they need to keep you sick. So guess what happens? They want you healthy, but they need you sick. And so as you start growing, they go, you think you're better than me now, do you? And they try knocking you back down because they want you healthy, but they need you sick. And what they need wins out. Or your parents, when you start getting healthy and you start setting boundaries and you start communicating differently and you start challenging some of the things in the home, they go, you think you're better than us, do you? After all we've put up with, now you're walking around high and mighty, and they try to knock you back down. Now here's the challenge for you, the sick one. Many people get here, and they go, I'm not going to let them knock me back down. So you keep growing, but then you realize the more I grow, the greater the distance between me and the ones that I love. So if I keep growing, I'm going to lose them. I don't think I'm ready to give that up. So instead of them knocking me down, I will knock myself down. I will self-sabotage. And you destroy your recovery so that you can be the sick one again and keep the superior, inferior relationship dynamics going. And I watch many, many people do that. So let me say this. For a relationship to work where there's been superior and inferior dynamics, both people have to realize they have issues. Both people need to realize they need to grow. And unless both are working on themselves, that relationship will never work. You can try, but if only one person is working on their stuff, you will gradually grow beyond them and it will all fall apart. So that is a really tough thing in recovery, but it's really important to understand the dynamics of what are going on there. Okay, next one. Because of all that shame, which came about from abuse, verbal and emotional and physical, people from complex trauma are hypersensitive to criticism. A healthy person, if you were to give them feedback, they wouldn't take it personally. They would say, thank you. Now I will process that and figure out what I need to learn and change and do. You could give them input if you're working on a project together, and they would say, wow, I appreciate your input. That I wouldn't have seen that. That is really great. A complex trauma person, you give them feedback, you're putting me down. You're saying I'm stupid. You're saying I can't do anything right. You give them input in a project and they go, you really think I'm stupid, don't you? They take it personally. They're hypersensitive. So you know what people do when they then see problems in your life? They tiptoe around you on eggshells, saying, should I say anything? Should I not? Because I know if I say anything, there's going to be a huge storm. And they struggle with what to do. And so that becomes a big issue if you want to grow, is you have to learn to accept feedback. Now, that doesn't mean somebody can come up to you and get in your face and call you down and be disrespectful. I'm not talking about that kind of feedback. I am talking about learning to accept healthy criticism, healthy feedback. It is an important part of saying, okay, don't take this personally. This is not to say I'm stupid. This is not to put me down. This is just to help me become a better person. Tied in with that is the next one. Hypersensitive to disrespect. It's connected to the criticism, but it goes a little bit further. So let me give you an example. When I was first married, when I would get home from work, Kim would be at home already, and I would be I want to see what came in the mail. Don't know why, it was just a stupid thing, okay? So I'm picking up the mail, and she's getting mad at me. No, she should have been mad at me. It was right. But she said, the mail matters more to you than me. And I go, no. Well, that's what you just told me. And I go, no, that was dumb on my part. I don't have to look at the mail. That's just kind of what I naturally did when I was a single guy. I'd come home and look at the mail. But she interpreted all of that as a statement of me disrespecting her. So I had to learn, but she had to also learn that just because I do something doesn't mean I'm trying to disrespect her. She read disrespect into things that weren't necessarily disrespect. And that is a common thing. I don't know if you've ever had where you walked by somebody and you nodded at them or you said hi and they didn't give you a response. And you go home, they just disrespected me. Maybe their marriage is breaking up and they're all up in their head. Maybe their boss just told them they're fired and they're trying to figure out what to do. They're preoccupied. But we can take every action that a person does and we go, in our mind, that goes in one of two boxes. It's all about me, so they either did that because they respect me or disrespect me. And I go, maybe there's another option. Maybe they did that for a different reason. It's not all about you. I would say that when it comes to triggering anger that goes from 0 to 100 in a nanosecond, feeling disrespected for complex trauma people is usually one of the hottest buttons. And it can take you from 0 to 100 anger-wise right away. So that can be a huge issue because you can do a lot of damage then in relationships by overreacting to stuff that maybe you just made up. Maybe it didn't even really happen, but you imagined it and went crazy. So it's going to be important, I think, as you go forward, to realize how sensitive your disrespect trigger is. When you feel triggered, de-escalating yourself. And then what Kim began to do with me is if she felt disrespected, she would say, "Are you disrespecting me?" And I would clarify. Communication. So that we began to understand each other better. And so you can go to people, and I had somebody come to me today. And they said, when you said that, I felt disrespected. And I said, I'm glad you told me that. I said, I wasn't disrespecting you at all. And I explained to her why I did what I did. And then she understood it. And she goes, oh, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And I said, thank you. And that was all taken care of. So that is a difficult thing because we don't like to go and confront anybody. Last one for today, and it comes out of all the others. Isn't it interesting when you don't let anybody else criticize you or disrespect you? You just do it all yourself. You criticize yourself more than anybody. Let me tell you a story. Somebody was telling me in a counseling session one day all the stuff that they were criticizing themselves for. So after they had finished, I said, so you're that way, are you? Now, what are you saying? Are you saying, I said, I'm just repeating what you just told me. And they just thought I was attacking them. That's how quickly they could go from, I can criticize me, but you can't. It doesn't make sense, but it happens. I would say in my years of counseling in addiction, pretty well everybody I deal with judges themselves harshly. We are our own worst judge, jury, executioner. If you were to fail, so let's say you said something kind of stupid and somebody had to correct you tonight. What would be going on in your head for the rest of the night, all the way home, maybe even keep you up tonight from being able to sleep? You go, I bet you everybody thinks I'm stupid. I can never go there again. I am so embarrassed. Oh, I am such a stupid person. I can't do anything right. And then the next day, you're mad on yourself, and then you can get to a place where you go, what's the point of this recovery? I just can't get it. And you beat yourself down to hopelessness and then giving up. I watch that happen all the time. Let me give you a step further on that. I don't know hardly any clients who are parents who don't at one time have a big, long, heart-wrenching cry over how they've hurt their children. They have so much guilt around that. And a couple things can come out of that. Number one, they can go, I don't deserve a good life after all the stuff I've done. Number two, I can't forgive myself for all the stuff I've done. So when you can't forgive yourself, your brain says, we need to execute justice against you. So you've done all this stuff against your kids. What does such a crime deserve for a penalty? What would justice be? And you're great at saying, I got to tear myself down. I got to put myself down. I can never acknowledge growth. I can never have anything that's too good because I don't deserve it. So that's a common thing. Then the next thing, I want people to think about, how did your parents parent you when you were little? If you failed or you did something stupid, they would shame you, they would criticize you, they would tear you down, put you down. And so what I say to clients is, how did that work? And they say, well, my parents were doing that to try and motivate me to change. And I say, did that work? And they say, for a little while I tried, but then I realized I couldn't ever meet their standards no matter how hard I tried. I would get criticized. So I actually rebelled and hardened myself to it and went the other direction. So I say, here's what's going on. You took your parents and you moved them into your head. Now you are your own internal parent, but you're parenting yourself just like your parents parented you. It didn't work then, so why do you think it should work now? Think about it. If you tear yourself down and judge yourself harshly, does it make you want to stay clean and sober? No. You get to a point where you say, screw it, and you relapse. Judging yourself harshly takes you on a path that is all downhill and ends in a relapse. It is a sad thing. Now, how do you let go of that? That is super hard, and you're not going to do it overnight. Here's what will probably happen. The next time you fail, let's say you say something to your kids tomorrow that you instantly regret. Then you start to beat yourself up and you stop yourself. And you say, no. You ask for forgiveness. You forgive yourself. You say, I can't go back and redo it, but I can change. And you learn from it. And then 10 minutes later, it pops in your head again. And you want to start beating yourself up, and you shut her down. Say, nope, nope, nope. Forgiven, changing. I'm going to become a better parent. And that kind of battle goes on. Sometimes you'll start beating yourself up, and after half an hour you'll catch yourself, and you'll go, uh-oh, I know where this goes. So what happens when you beat yourself up? You get super negative. Most people get angry. Then you start to isolate. Then you close your heart. All downhill, all bad. Then depression, then you get hopeless, helpless, not a good thing. So one of the most important things, I think, in beginning to deal with complex trauma, especially in recovery, is learning to be gracious to yourself. Learning to be kind to yourself. Now that doesn't mean you can go to your kid and say, I can call you down all I want, and I'm going to be kind to myself. I don't have to change. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying you're going to change. You're going to be truly sorry, but you're going to be kind in not beating yourself up, not whipping yourself, but forgiving yourself and learning from it. Now, let me say one more thing about this. When we feel guilt, we want to beat ourselves up. That's an emotion. Emotions are the limbic part of our brain. What happens in complex trauma is I am controlled by the limbic part of my brain, the emotions. The new way to live is from the cerebral cortex, the thinking part. So when I fail, I fire up the limbic system, which wants to start beating myself up. The cerebral cortex kicks in and it says, I trump you. We're not going to give in to how I feel right now. I'm going to do what I know is a healthier, wiser way. I'm going to ask for forgiveness, change, forgive myself. That is the cerebral cortex. So you're fighting against your emotions. You're not letting your emotions pull you the way they normally would. And you're following what you know is wise. What you know is healthy. What you know is the right way to do it. Let me give you one more perspective. I asked them, clients, how did your mom and dad treat you when you were a kid? Would you do that to your children? They go, oh, no, no, no. I go, so what would you do if one of your kids spilled their milk? I'd clean it up, say it's okay, and I would, if they're crying, comfort them and say I'm not mad, and I would assure them and encourage them. I go, great. Do that to yourself. What? That's a whole new way of parenting yourself. So let me conclude with this. I think one way to look at complex trauma, and it's an important way to get it, is that without realizing it, everything your parents did, you internalized in your brain, and now you parent yourself the same way. So recovery is learning to parent yourself in new, healthy ways. And that is a battle. That is a struggle. Because those things are deeply ingrained inside of you. I've told this before. I looked at a picture that had my grandpa, my dad, my brother, and his son. 4 generations sitting on a couch. All 4 had the identical posture. And I go, my grandpa didn't sit down with my dad one day and says, when you sit on a couch, sit this way. And he didn't take my brother aside and say, when you sit on a couch, sit this way. You just internalize it. You watch it. And it just starts to control you. That's the power of that influence. And so the more you can identify the bad parent in your head and replace it with a new healthy parent, the greater your chances of success. That is a huge struggle and a battle, but I hope you see it, and I hope you see that you can begin to change.